Britain never had the biggest army in the world. It never had the most people or the most money. But by the early 1900s, it controlled a quarter of the entire planet. 400 million people were living under British rule on every continent except Antarctica. So how did a small island nation pull that off? The answer isn't luck. It's a pattern, a repeatable playbook that shows up again and again in country after country, decades apart. Once you see the steps, you can't unsee them. Step 1. Arrive as merchants, not soldiers. In 1600, a group of London investors got a royal charter to trade spices and textiles in India. Just trade, nothing more. But within a century, that company, the East India Company, had built a private army bigger than most European nations kept for themselves. Send in people who look like business partners. Quietly build the muscle to take over later. Nigeria got the same treatment 200 years after, when the Royal Niger Company arrived to trade palm oil, carrying the identical setup: a charter, a flag, and soldiers who answered to shareholders, not a king. Step 2. Find the cracks and widen them. No country is perfectly united. In India, that crack was succession disputes between princes. Britain offered one side protection from a rival in exchange for trade rights and a permanent military base inside this prince's own territory. He thought he'd gained an ally. He'd actually let a garrison move in for good. It never looked like an invasion. It looked like a favor. Step 3. Make them owe you money. Egypt wanted to modernize fast in the 1800s, building railways, an army, the Suez Canal, and it borrowed from British and French banks to do it. The interest was brutal. Within 2 decades, Egypt owed more than its entire economy could ever repay. So Britain and France simply took over the treasury, deciding what an independent country's own tax money could be spent on. When Egyptians rebelled against that in 1882, British troops invaded to restore order. The occupation lasted 70 years. Step 4. Write the treaty so it can mean 2 things. In Nigeria, a chief named Nana Olomu controlled the Niger Delta's palm oil trade and refused to sign it over to the Royal Niger Company. So the company had him arrested and exiled to Ghana in 1894. Once he was gone, the trade agreements were rewritten in English he never got to read, let alone challenge. Sign the paper, remove the one person who could argue about the wording. Step 5. Provoke the crisis, then fix it. China banned opium because it was destroying its own population. British merchants smuggled it in anyway, backed by their own government's navy. When Chinese officials seized and destroyed British opium shipments in 1839, Britain didn't see a country protecting its people. It called that an attack on trade and declared war. China lost and was forced to accept the opium trade, hand over Hong Kong, and open its ports on British terms. Step 6. What was temporary becomes permanent. The East India Company's trading posts became direct British rule over India in 1858. Egypt's occupation lasted until 1956. Britain didn't leave Nigeria until 1960. A business relationship becomes a debt. A debt becomes a legal claim. A legal claim becomes a military base. A military base becomes a government. And nobody ever signs a paper that says conquest. At no single point did any of this look like conquest. We're just trading. We're just protecting our loan. We're just enforcing a treaty. We're just responding to violence against our own citizens. By the time anyone understood what had actually happened, The structures were already in place, and undoing them meant fighting a global superpower. This same shape shows up in Kenya, Malaya, the Gulf states. Different excuses, same sequence every time. None of these steps needed a massive invading army, a trading company, a loan, a treaty, a peacekeeping response. The difference between partnership and conquest was never really about the tools. It was about who held the leverage when the paperwork got signed, and who was still alive and free to argue about what it actually said. Once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. It's exactly what most history classes skip: the steps between trade began and an empire was built. That gap is where the real story lives, and it's still the same gap empires hide inside today. If you want more of the hidden mechanics behind history's biggest events, subscribe and hit that bell icon so you don't miss the next one.